and about. Yes, and there we go. There she goes.
Hello.
Well, good morning, Sarah. Welcome to Caledon Radio. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Taking a day off, actually.
Yes, so. I think you deserve it.
Oh, thank you.
And then you've got a day off, and then Caledon Radio bug you.
Well, it's better than sitting racking my brains and firing emails all over the place, and
Yes, well,
it's just a chat, isn't it?
Yes, right. Well, we're at a stage now, Sarah, where we've got good news. We're moving up in the world, Scotland, that is, and I want you to start because I know there'll be people out there wanting to hear and being enthused to hear this. I'm sure there'll be people out there who are skeptical about what they're hearing. And lastly, there's going to be people listening today that just don't want to hear the news. So let's get going. Let's crack on and try and convince people and reassure people about where we're going. Right, the good news. I'll let you start.
Well, it's that we've taken the first step to the international petition, to the UN to have Scotland listed for decolonisation, and have had our case looked at. And we're working with an organisation called Justice for All International, JPTI. And they're normally, what they do is they are about protecting, they're a human rights organisation. And of course, the self-determination of a nation is a human right, it's a basic human right.
Of course it is.
But they are normally concerned with things like persecution of journalists and whistleblowers and laws that it's all about justice. So this is a new one for them, and they're based in Geneva. And basically, what that means, what they will be doing is acting as our proxies.
Yes.
So
yes.
They will be putting forms in and setting up meetings and looking at strategy and so on. And this hasn't happened. In fact, this particular, there's only been a couple of, in the whole decolonisation process, there's only been a couple of former colonies that were listed without the administering power, as they call it, the colonizer, actually saying, well, this is, we have a dependency, a colony here. They call that, transmitting the information that there is a dependency. So where countries have wanted to pretend, as France did, for instance, with New Caledonia, with Polynesia, that everything was hunky-dory and that the people were quite happy where they were, and that they had as much self-determination as they wanted, then those countries were listed despite the objections of the administering the colonizing power. Scotland's in that position, and so it's very important that our case is strong. And so we finished we have this partnership memorandum of agreement with JPTI, which we finalized and sent off the documents and agreed on that last week. And they came back and that's the first time they'd seen, these were abbreviated case documents, of course. It was the first time they'd seen them, and they came back with a list of your cases. You've done it. This case is strong. We think this will go the way.
What do you think turned their heads to this? Because many people might be thinking, well, Scotland's got a certain degree of freedom. We're not inhibited visually in our everyday lives. We think we're free to walk the streets, for example, and all that kind of stuff. Free to go to shops and things that some countries other haven't got. The decolonisation, I know from people listening, people are still struggling to figure out what this is. I know it's a big question, Sarah, but if you could just explain what colonisation means, so that we can get on to the rest of this.
How long have you got?
Well, just to give the salient points, give the salient points of decolonisation, why we have that.
can I answer your first question first? What turned their heads? What made them go, okay, let's do this?
Yeah.
The very simple answer to that is that unlike the people here in this country, who have lived under British rule for so long, and with the reality that the British state has, peddled out over the centuries, Rule Britannia and all of that, and has kept. I mean, we don't have constitutional studies in our schools. We don't. Our kids don't learn about their civil rights or human rights, and that's not, that's not accidental. We live under an English state. It is in fact an English state, in which the power of the elite, the sovereignty of Parliament, and the government behaves as if it didn't even have to answer to Parliament.
Yeah,
it's absolute. It decides what the law is. If it doesn't like a law, well, then it changes the law. If it doesn't like what the law means, then it changes what the law means. And we have lived in that system, which is effectively feudal. It's the development of a feudal overlordship over the years, and the sense of privilege, and the pyramid with the real important human beings at the top and the scum at the bottom. We have lived with that. We have lived with what they have told us is true, and what they have told us is the realpolitik. And for, let's face it, centuries, that state controlled much of the world and was the power in the world. So that you have to remember where you come from. When we talk about history, we don't mean, and Salvo talks about know your past. We don't mean, run around with your face painted blue shouting freedom. We mean if you don't know, what I'm talking about is your past. If you do not understand the history of the state in which we have been oppressed and held down and unable to develop, in which we live today, where it came from and how it formed, you don't really know what you're up against. Yeah. So the answer to your first question is, why did JPTI look at this and go, absolutely great case here? Because they're not ignorant, because they don't live in the bubble that is created by the British state, Anglo-British state, because they live in a world in which international realities, politics, are right in front of them, because they see these arguments played out at the UN every week. So they're well aware of what colonization really is, and what's happening in former colonies, and how colonization has continued in the world. And they know what it really looks like. Here, we only know what the British state has painted in terms of a picture of a colony. And that is a sort of cliched, very exaggerated, historic picture of something that happened a long time ago. Because they deny, for instance, that Ireland, the whole world knows that Ireland was a colony, but the British state doesn't acknowledge that. And so you still want to know what a colony is?
We're getting there. I think people realise that we're getting ruled by another country, and that's not a good thing. We've been under this guise of a UK, and that's an inclusive United Kingdom, but it doesn't hold any water, because if you go back in history, we're not part of a voluntary union.
No. Well, so a colony is not what people have in mind. I mean, and honestly, even so much of our legal establishment, Scottish legal and political establishment, simply don't know what a colony is. They have this picture, they have this idea, this sort of cartoon version of what a colony is in their heads. And a colony is very simply a people under a foreign sovereignty, a people that are being oppressed, that have been denied their right to self-determination, and are being administered under the rule of a foreign power. Now, one of the reasons that our establishment, as you've rightly said, denies that Scotland is a colony and says poo-poo, etc., is because they have swallowed the line that Scotland entered into a voluntary partnership with England and created a state known as the United Kingdom. Now, if that's true, then we're not a colony. We're a partner, even if we're a very badly abused partner that needs to get out of it, in a kind of a marriage, a kind of a union. But that would require there to be a partnership. And so what we've done over we started where took a good look at the terms and conditions of this partnership, this union, and it was clear that there were preconditions. There were conditions under which the treaty was to be signed, conditions under which the union itself could come about. And one of those was the continuation in Scotland of the Claims of Right Act of 1689, which upholds the civil rights of the people of Scotland, which our Scottish executive, because I won't any longer call them a government, really ought to go and have a look at. They really ought to go and have a look at the civil rights in Scotland under the Claim of Right, which is our common law and is still in force and was a condition of that union, because they're breaching those civil rights today.
Exactly.
It also upholds the difference in Scotland, the constitutional difference in Scotland, which is a little more than a golden thread, which makes people legally the authority over the government.
Yes.
And by deposing a king and his parliament, because here's another little constitutional fact. The parliament in England, like the three estates in Scotland, was an extension of the King's or Queen's Council. So you can't call parliament with it. That's why the monarch has to open parliament, because the monarch has to call that parliament. Scotland, in fact, had three parliaments. Only one of them had to be called by the monarch. But that parliament, that government, the king in parliament or the queen in parliament, being removed by one of the other parliaments, Convention of Estates, for violating the people's rights and for violating the Scottish Constitution, establishes, it doesn't have to say the people are sovereign over their government, because they do it.
They just do it.
They did the sovereignty. They went, you're fired. And the parliament, you're out, because you violated the Constitution and you failed to take the oath to uphold the crown. That, incidentally, is another important thing in Scotland. The crown, which the monarch had to swear to protect, defend, and uphold, and never to transfer or undermine its rights. You can't take an oath to yourself. So when the monarch in Scotland had to take an oath to the crown, that shows that the crown and the monarch are two separate things, unlike England.
That's right.
Now, those things were really, really important. They meant that in Scotland, if the union was real, the people remained sovereign, their rights remained in place. And the reason I mentioned the crown is because the crown is separate, because it's the community of the realm.
Yes.
Constitutionally. So the people, so that was protected. That is what was protected as a condition of the union. So where we began was, if there's a union, if there's a partnership, a voluntary partnership, then the conditions that allowed it to take place must be there. If those conditions have been thrown out, which they have, then we're not in a partnership, and the only other thing we could be is a colony, it's dependency. So we plan to go and force that question to be looked at and answered at an international level. And to do that, we had to establish a liberation movement, because you have to have standing. You have to be the kind of NGO or a state that can approach, one of these major UN organs, committees, to get a hearing, to get your question answered. So that's where all the work has been, is establishing a real liberation movement, 16,000 strong plus, and with on the ground campaigns. Salvo is, campaign and fundraising arm, campaigning for recognition of the constitutional rights of Scotland, if there is a union, the sovereignty of the people of Scotland, the protesting and campaigning against the transfer of the people's sovereignty over their land in these unlawful free ports and special economic zones where the sovereignty is being transferred to corporations. So we had to do all of that. And it's kind of hard work to organize a democratic campaign of that size, get it going. We've got 11 salvo hubs across Scotland, and all of that constituted democratic. That's a huge amount of work, and we had to have that all in place, including an elected Central Committee for Liberation Scotland, before we could say, right, we have a liberation movement in Scotland. And while we were doing that, we found out something even more extraordinary. And that is that we don't need to ask the question, which is it?
Yeah.
Because the treaty was put in the bin before the ink was dry.
Isn't that
The agreement?
wow?
Sorry.
I remember you telling me this, Sarah. You came on air and you says, "I'm going to tell you something you might not believe, but this Treaty of Union has been a joke. It's non-existent," and it took
Yeah.
me a while to get to get me back in my seat. And then I started thinking about this, and I thought, well, where is it? Who wrote it? You know, we see the Magna Carta and we see all these other bits. Where is the actual signatory and the writing of all this? And let's have a look at it. What does it say if it is there? And where is it?
Well, it is there. David Henry actually tracked it down, photographed it, and professionally, and you can buy a copy.
But what does it say?
And what it says, it's in very flowery language, as you probably know. So. But what it actually says is this: that there are two principal effects of the treaty, and what they say is that the kingdoms of England and Scotland are to be united into one kingdom.
Yeah.
Now, a kingdom is the territorial jurisdiction of a crown. So what it says is that there is to be one crown, one kingdom from here on. And that kingdom is going to be called Great Britain. And there's going to be one parliament, and that will be the Parliament of Great Britain. And it's absolutely clear from the language of the treaty that this is a new kingdom, and this is a new parliament, and it's going to replace what was there beforehand. And this is what Lord Cooper said, and T.B. Smith said, and in 2022 you heard Dorothy Bain at the Supreme Court saying that the two former kingdoms of England and Scotland were extinguished and were replaced by the new kingdom of Great Britain, which is now the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Except, and that's what happened, because that's what the treaty says.
That's what it says.
Aha. Now, the treaty might say that, but that doesn't mean it happened just because the treaty said.
I know. This is the exciting part about this.
Exactly. So what really happened was, you're going to have a new crown. You're going to have a new kingdom. All right. So you take the crown of England going back to 1066, and the crown of Scotland going back to 843. They're both going to have to be abolished to create a new one. But neither one is. Instead, Scotland is added to the Coronation Oath of England, or as the House of Commons Library puts it, the Coronation Oath was extended to Scotland. In the same way that it was extended to Ireland, and extended to India, and extended to Kenya, and extended to Malaysia. And, get the drift? So the Coronation Oath of England was extended to Scotland. The Crown of England remained. No new kingdom, because the kingdom under that crown is England.
That's right.
The Scottish crown couldn't be abolished, partly because the claim of right was one of the conditions of union, even though they shoved it in the bin. But there's no way to abolish a crown, so all they did was left it vacant. Nobody after Anne, no English king or queen, took the Scottish coronation oath, which under the claim of right is required for a legal monarch. So Scotland hasn't had a legal monarch since Anne, and the one we have got is under the English crown, which is not, which is foreign sovereignty. And that was simply done. Okay, this is how we're going to create a new kingdom. We'll leave both the crowns, so no new kingdom. We'll put Scotland into the English coronation oath, so we've got an English crown, not ours. Scotland's now a subsidiary, and it's now administered under the rights of an English crown, which have no claim whatever in Scotland. Right? And the Scottish crown, which is the people, the community of the realm, owns everything in Scotland. Remember, it's separate in Scotland from the monarch. So even although they didn't allow Scotland's, they didn't allow there to be a monarch that took the Scottish oath to uphold the crown, that is the rights of the people. They put us under the English crown and an English monarch. The crown didn't disappear, because the crown, even without a monarch, the crown continues.
Yes.
Because it's the people, it's the
'Cause it's
community of the
us.
realm.
Yeah.
It's us. So it's still there, and we're still the owners, and they are literally plundering what belongs to us. That is the essence of a colony. One last thing. The new parliament, and there have been people back and forward. Well, is it the English parliament? Is it a mixed parliament? You know, what was it? Well, I can tell you exactly what it was. Anne abolished the Scottish Parliament. Abolished it. It didn't go into abeyance. It didn't go into adjournment. It was abolished by royal decree, in order that the only parliament shall be the Parliament of Great Britain. Now, that is what would have had to happen to create a new Parliament of Great Britain.
Yes.
Both parliaments would have had to be abolished. But the English Parliament was not. Instead, the MPs from the House of Commons were brought into the House of Lords to be told that this was now the new Parliament of Great Britain. Yeah. But they could have called it a purple flowering elephant. It was still the Parliament of England, just like you can call the Crown of England the Crown of Great, but it's still the English Crown. Right. And any historian will tell you that. So you have the Crown of England continuing. You have the Parliament of England without a break continuing. You have Scotland's Crown placed under that of England, and now administered under an English crown, and that's why we get English law, English treason law, etc., etc. And you have the English Parliament continuing without a beat. Well, Scotland's Parliament is abolished, which is not, for which there is no treaty, there is no agreement.
There's no.
This is an entirely different set of actions from those described in the treaty, and the only piece of evidence, the only agreement that exists which classes Scotland as a partner in the Union is that treaty and the Acts of Union.
And it's pretty flimsy.
And those were, I mean, what they've done is that thing that the English state does so well. It's semantic fraud. It's bluff and bluster, and we can call the purple elephant. We can call this a purple elephant, and therefore, for the purposes of law in the world, it is a purple elephant. But it's not. The fact of it is that it's not. And they've got away with it because it's never been subject to international legal scrutiny.
Yeah.
But there's no description for Scotland.
Indeed.
Which certainly did enter into a union, or agree to enter into a union, and instead it got kidnapped, imprisoned and plundered and turned into a colony, which has always been their aim. So,
and it's got to be said, over the years, those that wanted home rule or wanted some kind of restoration of the Scottish Parliament were treated harshly. I'm thinking of John Maclean, treated for sedition. That they had no right to do that, Sarah, but they did, and that was the.
Well, you see, they had the same right to do it in Scotland as they had to do it in India and Ireland and everywhere else.
Yeah, that's right.
They just pretended. They didn't really bother in Scotland until we got into kind of relatively modern times. But then they were pretending to the world, and oh look, the union has been. But they said that to every colony. The union has been so good for you. You've benefited. Look, you were an enthusiastic partner in it. No, we weren't. No. We're not. We have, not only did we have a derisory number of MPs in their English Parliament, but there is no aspect in which the partnership came into existence. None. You can't say we're going to do this. We're going to create this new kingdom and this new parliament, and then say, well, actually, instead, what we're going to do is we're going to stick the English crown and English treason law, which is the law they used to punish anyone that wanted reform. Right. English treason law, completely incompatible with Scots, which reflects the rights of the people. And we're going to impose this English law on you, like we did in India and everywhere else, and we're going to punish you under that English law. And so what is the treaty worth? Well, nothing. It's what's called an inoperative treaty. So the agreement that made us a partnership is inoperative. And when you strip it away and you look at foreign sovereignty, oppression, imposition of foreign rule, without any agreement, that wasn't the exercise of self-determination. We didn't enter into We didn't volunteer to be annexed and put under an English crown
no.
and have our parliament abolished while theirs continues. And that's not what the treaty says. That's not what the agreement says.
Yeah,
We didn't agree to what they've done to Scotland, and
that's
that
right.
makes us a colony technically. Then you add Alf's work, and Alf Baird's, work in Doonhoden.
Hmm. We'll get to
Uh,
Alf in a wee second.
okay,
But
but that is the technical case. It means there is nothing that we can be except a
mhm,
dependency. And that's why we're so sure, that in an environment, in a forum, in an international forum where the doublespeak and the bluff
mhm,
and the
mhm.
pretense and the gaslighting and the fog that is imposed
I
by the
know.
British state at home on the whole establishment does not cut any ice.
But aren't we our own worst enemies, Sarah? Because you mentioned earlier that you don't want to call it a Scottish government because it's not. It's an executive arm of Westminster. We're
Mm,
under the Scotland Act. We have to take an oath in the Scottish Parliament to a foreign queen or king now. And
mm,
most politicians do that. They have one fist tied behind their back, but they ultimately do take an oath.
yeah.
So, in every aspect of institutionalized Scotland, there is a deference back to Westminster again.
Always, and they're there's you look at how Scotland is run by England, and how we are treated,
Hmm.
and the fear. You look at.
Yeah.
I mean, this is
Hmm.
one of the signs that you're living in a colony. One of the clear pieces of evidence, that you're in the Truman Show here, guys. Is that is that the fear that underpins the way a
Yeah.
colonizer
Aye.
operates.
Mhm.
They're afraid to let us have any kind of media, any kind of genuine Scottish media, any
Correct.
voice. They're
Correct.
afraid to let us call our Scottish strawberries Scottish strawberries. They're busy
Hmm.
trying to produce English whiskey. They're afraid of everything that identifies Scotland as something other than Northern England.
Yes. Do you know what, Sarah? The Six Nations are on, and Scotland are
Mm,
playing England. And you know, if you watch BBC to watch the Scotland game, there's an English
mm,
ex-player there. What the? Oh, we can't do it without him, can we? We can't do a show without the English guy being there. And there's
no,
another English anchor. See if you go over to Ireland and watch RTE. This is
yeah,
colonization, the soft aspect of it, if you like. We don't get
yeah,
our own voices, our own sport. And
no,
with our football, it makes it even worse. People will resonate with this. When Scotland play in international football, we have to pay per view. And
yeah,
instead, STV put on the England game.
yeah.
It's wake up, people. This is happening to us, and this is part of the colonization trick, if you like. This is the what did you call it, Sarah? The semantic fraud.
Fraud by semantics.
Aye, that this is the best you'll ever get, and we're doing a good job for you, Scotland. We're giving you live football. Okay, you have to get it by pay per view. Oh, but you'll have to put up the English commentators. It's just a nonsense. It doesn't happen
Everything,
anywhere.
everything in a colony, in a dependency, has a gatekeeper, and it's really about,
Yeah.
it's I often I try to think of analogies for this, but it's this business of where you think you're living in, it's why I call it the Truman Show. You
Hmm.
think you're living in a one particular world. You're sure you know the world, you know everything about it,
Hmm.
because you can't see the joins in the stage, props, in the scenery. The
Hmm.
you can't see the artificial sky,
Hmm.
and the pretend sun. And this is your world. You know the world. You've lived in it all your life. You know what it is. And then suddenly somebody turns the lights out,
Hmm.
or something happens, and you wake up. And I've had that experience myself. You wake up and you look around, and it is an oh my god moment. You
Hmm.
realize I've been living all this time. We are living in a colony. And then you see it, and you cannot unsee it. Every single industry, our stock exchange, everything we own as a people,
Yeah.
every civil
Hmm.
right,
Hmm.
our universities, the academics, the jobs advertised in England, populated by English academics. You have Scottish historians, 4 of them writing the
Hmm.
national because clearly somebody knows what we're doing. Right? Oh, Scotland was a colonizer. Scotland wasn't a colony; it was a colonizer. Well, I'm sorry, but if you don't have any agency, if you're run under an English crown, you've no parliament. You're not part of a new one. You're part of the old English Parliament, and the government is an English government in which you have absolutely no say. Well, I'm sorry, but the good ship, Imperial Colonizer, belongs to that government and that crown, and Scotland doesn't have one in the game. And we may have fantastically shameful Scots, but those appalling human beings who benefited from a trade in human beings.
Yeah, indeed.
For which we should all be, and we should be collectively ashamed that we produced anything like that, people like that. But every country did, every nation did. What we were not was a partner in that in that horrific project, British English Empire project. What we were dragged along, and yes, people joined in and made a profit, but we had never done that before the Union. And those that did were simply typical of what happened in every colony. Every single colony, there were people that did that. Call them the Vichy or Comprador or whatever you want to call them. They made money out of the suffering of their own people and others. But a nation that has been taken over under a foreign crown and a foreign parliament doesn't run the ship, doesn't even have a first mate on that ship.
No.
So
do you know this, Sarah? If I just come in for a wee second.
You have these establishment historians
writing
the British state story. Oh yes, Scotland was there as a partner in it. There it is, still going on.
Do you know this? If when I've got a book by David Ditchburn, and it's Scotland in the 13th and 14th century, how we traded with the Low Countries in Europe, and how we built boats. We didn't have the proper wood, but we bartered for the wood and for wool and all kinds of stuff. There was a, but one of the things that comes out of it is that Scotland depended very much on community. You had to rely on neighbours to help and look after kids while you were doing something. It was almost like my problem is your problem, and if we can get through this, because people just wanted to be fed and clothed and watered and survive. There was there's no leisure things to talk about that we can really go back and see what was a great thing, apart from maybe music and dance. So most of the time was about staying alive in Scotland, 13th, 14th century. And this community was shattered, was broken. And we were divided because it's easier to rule you if you're divided. And communities were then at the mercy of markets. And in Glasgow, we don't have to look far at how people were treated. They were given slum houses. That never happened before. If your house has fallen down, somebody would help you rebuild it. Do you know what I mean?
Well, but the principle, I've just been rereading, Andy Whiteman's "The Poor Had No Lawyers." There are things in that they're really important that he gets absolutely right. And it's not that he gets stuff wrong, but there are aspects that are just hinted at that are actually hugely, hugely important, massively important. The common good, that word, which applies to common good lands, the common good, the principle of the common good. It's a very Celtic thing. You'll find it in the Irish Constitution if you take a look. This notion that the common good is of the purpose of government. It's built out of that lived experience, that way that the Scots were organized. And my friend, I used to talk about that with my friend Nancy Long, who was the head clan mother of the Deer clan in Boundary, Cherokee, in North Carolina. And we talked about these principles, how similar the ones in Scotland in those, in that clan, what we think of as a clan system, but actually it was right across Scotland. Down, even not so much down in Fife, I suppose, where there was a big Anglo-Saxon population that came in, particularly with Margaret Canmore,
Oh
Wycliffe
yeah,
Malcolm
yeah.
Canmore. So, but right across Scotland, these values, it's the values and the way of life of a community from which we get, clan, which has to do with children, family, duchas, which means home. Precisely what you're talking about, and that transferred into Scots law. It transferred into the way that Scotland organised itself politically, and and Andy Whiteman notes that at the time, by the time of Bruce and just after, thirds of Scotland was unaffected by this first colonisation. He's writing that the attempt to Anglicise Scotland. It remained absolutely there until, till they came after us in 1746 to squash it, to get rid of it, and to forcibly Anglicise Scotland. And that's what Nancy used to say was, when you look at the way Native American communities were organised, or you look at, elsewhere at Indigenous communities, she said, you will find when you compare it that they're shockingly similar. That's because Indigenous people have more in common with one another wherever they are in the world than they have with the white culture. By the white culture, she meant the feudal Anglo-Saxon, materialist culture that we think of as the culture of the West today.
Well, getting back to the news we've got on, I want to get back to the organisation that you sought out. This was the JTE. What was it again?
JPTI, Justice for
International. Did they take Scotland and put it into some kind of precedent that this has happened before and they could match up? Or was Scotland a standalone case here? How did they work out?
I think any country that is not willingly surrendered by the colonizer is a standalone, because colonization happens differently in every time, in every case. So you can look at New Zealand, and they're now struggling with this Treaty of Waitangi that and you can look at that, and so you can see parallels with the way that Scotland was treated. And hilariously, the British state lawyers Crawford and Boyle try to argue that because Waitangi was all right, so is the Treaty of Union, and it's the other way around. I'm so right, but there is no comparison. They're quite different. But what we have after 80 years is that the real. So the UN was established. The Charter was established in 1945. I think I'm correct in saying that. So that's, you're talking 80 years of the UN's existence, and based on and the decolonization program really got underway in the 50s and 60s. And so that meant that there were all these different aspects, all these countries, all these peoples subjected to, well, let's face it, horrors. Now, because we don't remember our history, and that's largely because it isn't taught.
Correct.
You wouldn't know, for instance, that it was an act of the English Parliament that changed Scots land holding and rights, so that the City of London could home in on and via, and give. Remember, after the 1745, they could get rid of any chieftain that they thought that was accused of being sympathetic.
Do you know this, Sarah? On that, can I just mention there's a lassie doing a wee podcast, Claire. I can't remember Claire's second name, but she's in Fort William. That's where I grew up, and that's why I was interested in it. And she says, this is a false name. It shouldn't be Fort William. This was given to us. Now, this is a young podcaster, and she's talking about colonialism on her podcast, and she's talking about the names of places getting changed. But there's a problem, because the Gaelic is Angariston, a garrison. But before that, there was no garrison. It was called Duncansborough or Inverlochy. There was different parts to this place. And she was exploring all this. And you know what? I just thought, yeah, that's why there's a Duncansborough church there. There's
Right.
still traces of that place
Yeah.
before it was anglicized. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yes, and but what? So you talk about the horrors. I'm just the horrors of colonialism, and I don't know a lot of people will know what happened to in the Congo, what the
Oh,
Belgian
yeah.
king did.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in Scotland, what happened was that in 1746, when they began their Anglicisation of Scotland, really full on, they changed I can't remember the name of the law, but it meant that on the back of what was happening, so they had another which said they could take any land away from people, from chieftains who had been loyal to the Stuarts, or anti the English crown, which is actually what it was more about. It wasn't so much it wasn't so much loyalty to the Stuarts and Bonnie Prince Charlie as it was loathing of this English English crown and the imposition of the English crown instead of the terms of the treaty, which back then, of course, everybody knew. Today we've forgotten. And so, in order to get rid of this loathing of the colonizer, the English crown that might still be there, anybody supposedly sympathetic to that point of view could have their lands taken and given to somebody else, and that somebody else could now, under this new law in 1746, clear the people off their land, which under Scots law they could not have done.
Exactly.
And then in comes the city, and then in comes the City of London, and it focuses in on backing and in prime arable land, and people are put onto vile, where you cannot thrive, sent to die on the coasts, or thrown into slums or whatever. But then, to help them out of kindness, they also have this immigration project whereby former slave ships are used to transfer Scots to the colonies, to grow the English Empire colonies. Oh yeah, we were a big partner in that. The deaths, the number of deaths, and the butchery right after Culloden, the butchery of people that had nothing to do with it, up and down the length and breadth. The installation of an English garrison in every town and hamlet across Scotland to keep us under English rule. We experienced what in Scotland, what every colony experienced, and people do not realise that this was not a civil war between Scots. This was a rising against a foreign invasion and a foreign crown, muddied by religion, yes, but 51% of the so-called Jacobite army, prosperity for Scotland and no union on their swords, 51% were Lowland. And the clearances began in the Lowlands before they reached the Highlands. So we had an occupying army. And until I read somewhere, until the 60s, nobody pretended it was a Scottish Civil War. It was England versus Scotland. It was the English, invading Scotland, because they were rejecting English rule, as we always had. That was a colonial operation. That is precisely what it was, and it was followed up by imposing English courts up and down the length, through those garrisons, the length and breadth of Scotland, renaming all those places in Scotland, insisting on English being spoken, and calling it the civilization of the Highlands. So
I know that's how did they get away with that? Crazy.
So and they had already taken our trade. They'd already shut that down.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
And and so they had basically taken Scotland out as a prosperous nation and a threat to their trading empire. And they then took Scotland out as a nation that didn't want to be under English rule. And that's what it was. It was English rule. The Scots knew it, and they took us out. Now, when we read about the colonization and what they did in Kenya, say in the 1960s, and had been doing before that, or say in Singapore or wherever else, we look at that. It's across the water, and these people don't look like we do, and so you have this, this awful influx of, the white supremacists, which they were, and it doesn't look the same. But if you go back to when it started in Scotland, and the trick of this treaty and what they actually did and how that played out, and those hellish immigrant ships that the Scots were put onto all the way through to the 1900s, and the loss of our population, the loss of, the largest loss of a population in Europe, about 4.2 million people. and how our population has not thrived and grown in the way that others have because we're a colony, you realize, don't tell me that it's an insult to other colonies to say that Scotland is a colony, because I will tell you it is an absolute insult to Scotland to say that we're not.
Exactly. Now, getting back to Alf Baird and his input into all this, I've interviewed Alf a few times. And one thing that I kind of came across that's something that would stick in the craws of a lot of people would be this sense of ethnic nationalism. Only the people here should have the vote. All the people that are Scottish and have got Scotland at their heart, as opposed to the civic nationalism that was put forward before, where everybody can.
Oh my God, civic nationalism, please.
Sorry. I know, but the thing is, a lot of people, they really don't. I guess they've been colonised so much that they don't want to upset the cart a bit here, and they all say, "Well, this is terrible," because my next door neighbour stays here, he pays his tax here, and all the rest of it. But he's only been here for 8 months. Why doesn't he get a vote in it? And it's a very contentious thing, but it's a very important one to discuss. And Alf puts it in really good terms about, and I'll refer back to the Six Nations, Sarah. I've got English neighbours. This is Drumnadrochit. There's a lot of them here. And see, when it comes to the rugby, they will not be supporting Scotland. No. They will be supporting England. That is their team. So how do you, when it comes to a referendum vote or a vote on your future, where do you think they'll vote? How do you think they'll do it? So we have to wake up and think, the Scots, us Scots, the ones that are left, must be the ones that take the vote for our future.
Well, it's not difficult to go and have a look at what the UN stipulated. For instance, the New Caledonia situation has been very useful for us, because they had to go into, well, who should have a vote, because of the way France was holding on to New Caledonia and saying, and settling it and bringing in French settlers to precisely to swing that vote, to outvote the indigenous population. They had to come up with a format, and they did. And what that forced, I suppose, the international community to do and to look at, which is always very good, is, well, who is it? Who gets a vote? Who should have a vote? If you live here, if you live here, why wouldn't you get a say? And so you then have, well, because you will never be voting in the interests of the colony, you will always think of yourself and feel yourself to be the colonizer. You will come to this, and this is what's underneath it. So this doesn't come out on the rules, but it's there underneath. People recognizing this, that the colonizer will see the people of that region or that nation as inferior. The colonizer will perceive the interests of the mother colony, the administering power, as paramount, will identify with the administering power and not with the indigenous population, whose identity is being stripped away from them. And so that means you have to come at this very carefully. You have to say, okay, we want to be inclusive. However, we're certainly not wanting, and that is part of the action of colonization, as Alf points out, is deliberately putting people in, pushing the indigenous population out and bringing in settlers to say, well, now here you are, now we're Northern England, we're not Scotland. You see, we've got so many English here, we're Northern England, so Scotland's gone anyway. And that's part of the colonial playbook. So
do you know there's a street in Uddingston, Sarah, called North Britain Street? Unbelievable, isn't it, in this day and age? But up here, we're getting new houses built, and they've been sold on the market, and a lot of English folk are selling a garage to buy one of these houses because it's up in the Highlands, it's full of freedoms, and they're even advertising it because you'll get free personal care and free this and that because of the Scottish government. And so they're getting sold to people who can afford it more than the people here can. But the people here didn't even want these houses, so they're not wanting to buy them. And so they're getting a deeper saturation of people coming into Scotland for all the wrong reasons, and we have to be really, really careful about where our houses and where our communities are going.
We need, if we had a Scottish executive that had a backbone and
I know.
you know, and actually cared about what is happening to Scots and to Scotland, rather than trying to justify its flailing gender recognition bill, and the various other divisive things that have nothing to do with the absolute calamity, the crisis Scotland is in right now, then we might be able to do something about it. You can look and see. I think I was reading somewhere that they're going to bring in taxes on second homes.
Yes.
Where I was at Wales. No, anyway, one of the islands maybe. Anyway, we need the elected representatives such as we have to step up for Scotland and say, you're not, look at this, our people can't afford, they can't get work here, they can't afford houses here, they can't live here. And guys, I know none of you are listening, but somebody could pass this on. You need to go and have a wee look at international law and human rights, because you've got grounds all over the place that you could take all the way to the International Court of, the European Court of Human Rights, in terms of what is being done to the people of Scotland and their right to live and thrive at home. It should not have taken a group of pensioners and people in their spare time or whatever to cover and push and take us. You should be doing something about this yourselves. Shame on you. Shame on you.
Yeah. Do you know this? If we were an independent country, us, the people, could kick them out right now, but unfortunately, we're not in that position yet. But it does bring me to the cusp of the matter. We've got the justice for what are they called again? I can never remember this. The JTP.
Justice for all.
Justice for all. The next stage, I guess, would be the United Nations. How much does their collaboration with us help us get to the United Nations and the colonization committees there?
At the most basic level, you need an office, a footprint, where, so that you've got a route between liberation and the UN, and JPTI can provide that. But they can also help ensure that we get documents in to where they need to be and on time. They can also make sure that we get meetings set, that they can set meetings up with potential sponsor, member states, representatives, member states.
Oh, wow.
What we really, what happens next is that we have a big educational task ahead of us, because the truth, because what's being said and is believed about Scotland being a voluntary partner in a union, and our own political establishment and judiciary mouth that nonsense, as if it was the truth, and the international community was told that, nobody disbelieved it. So setting the truth out in front of them, not only the technical thing, look, there's no partnership, okay, so how can we be a partnership? We've been administered under colonial rule. All of this, how they describe it, no matter what they say, doesn't matter if they say, well, it was symbolic and we just called the English crown the British crown and that was it, really. Well, not in international law. That that's still the English crown, and you're still running Scotland, and still incompatible with Scots law and the rights of the Scottish people. So that is obvious once it's exposed, and that, I think, is likely to go around the international community like wildfire.
I think so. I think so.
So what we're really looking for is this recognition, and ideally we get official listing for decolonization. But in truth and practice, if the vast majority of states recognize that Scotland was colonized and that there is no voluntary partnership, it means they also have to recognize that the state calling itself the UK, that's pranced around like a bantam cock on the international stage, this bastion of democracy and civilization, never came into existence, because by declaring Scotland a voluntary partner that entered the Union, as a partner and not as a dependency, it also declared its own international personality as having been created by a distinct constitutional event. And that event, it has described, it has claimed, is this treaty, thereby that England, the kingdom, was dissolved, and Scotland, the kingdom, was dissolved, and this bantam cockerel of a state, the United Kingdom, came into existence through this distinct constitutional event.
Well, the other thing that I was wanting to mention to you, Sarah, is this. The JPTI is a non-UK organisation. It's the first time we've taken this argument outside of the UK. We're not talking about it ourselves. We're giving it to an arbitrator, and they've come down on our side. This is massive. This is big news.
But look, the truth is, it's always been a house of cards. And what I was going to say to you is what I'm looking forward to is the recognition in the international community that this strutting state called the United Kingdom, which has defined itself in this way as having been created by a distinct constitutional event which dissolved the previous kingdoms and created this new state, is only England. It doesn't exist. The state itself is a fraud and a fiction, like the Wizard of Oz with the wee guy behind the curtain. And when you say that outside of these colonized islands, where people have simply swallowed whatever the sovereign authority of English Parliament tells you. They can make black mean white. They can turn truth and logic into a pretzel, and nobody blinks an eye. But that doesn't happen. There was a lawyer called Mark Elliott wrote an article. I think he called it "The Legal Kryptonite." Anyway, he talked about how this idea of the parliamentary supremacy and its right to reinterpret and apply law in any way it likes, dissolves in contact with international law. And that's why it has been so important to get Scotland's case into an international forum where it can be seen for what it is, because people there are not gaslit. In fact, the UK is not a terribly popular entity. I'm really looking forward to people realizing it's just England and see what they want to do about that, because England wasn't elected to the Security Council of the United Nations. A thing called the UK that doesn't exist was elected to that. So there's a lot of
that's right.
For unraveling these lies and for Scotland's cause here. But the thing to remember is, it's the importance of doing this is that the conditions for a partner in a voluntary union, the conditions for a co-parent in the creation of a state to withdraw from that state, that's remedial secession. Correct. And that's what you find, McCorkdale and Mark Weller and so on, great guys talking about how we do this and negotiate this and the divorce. That is what's required in international law for the partner in the creation of a state, because the state is like a child and the two parents don't get to cut it in half, neither one of them. However, when it comes to a country that has been colonized, where no such state came into existence, and Scotland has simply been a victim with the bully's boot on its throat all this time, the right to get up and push the bully off is an entirely different thing from parents who want to rip a child apart. We don't have a child. There was no child.
But Sarah, there's going to be a reaction to this, isn't there? We're going to be bombarded with love bombs, and we're going to be told that America depends on us. And there's a nuclear site in Scotland. There's all kinds of military shenanigans going on. There'll be a lot of heavy petting. There might even be a lot of pressure on Scots not to accept this. How do we combat that when it happens? Because it will, because it's happened before, and we know how colonizers work.
Here's the thing: Scotland has been kept out of the international arena for a very long time. We've had it's very easy to believe. Let's go back to the Truman Show. It's very easy to believe that the world you're walking around in is real. There's there's the sea and the sun and all the rest of it, and that's what's real. You live in that. When you get to the edge of the construct of the illusion, and you see the paint and the holes and the that it's cobbled together, and you see what it is. That's when you can't unsee it. And Mark Eliot was right. This contact with international law, contact with reality, knocks the pretense right down. It knocks it out. Wow. What happens then is people see it, and it's what we found. I've had so many people write to me about this. Once they can see it for themselves, we don't say, oh, trust us, believe us. It's like, here it is, read it, think about it, go look at it, go look until you see it, and you do. Then everybody wakes up, they blink, they look around, they go, what the heck have we been thinking? This is so obvious. And when you see a chance, you will then take it. So we've had to create, if we've done nothing else, we create a route where something can actually happen, where you can introduce some sanity, some reality into the picture. And even if we didn't get listening, which we will for decolonization, if the majority of countries recognized that this is what has been done to Scotland, they would then recognize an independent Scotland if we were to use a vote on a plebiscite, as long as we follow the lines, which we'll talk about another time, but international requirements.
Yeah, we'll get you on again.
But then it comes home, you see. So we do this. We run this campaign internationally. We keep people up to date. We report back. We show people what's happening. We bring speakers over. So that people see Scotland is a dependency. It is a colony. It has a right to throw the boot off its throat before we're suffocated to death, and to sit up and take stuff back. But then it's going to be down to us, because the UN will not come riding over the hill and say, there you are, Scotland, you're independent. No. It will simply recognize that we're not in a partnership, that Westminster has no right to tell us whether or not we can have a referendum or a plebiscite or anything else, that we have an absolute right to decide to get out of this colonial situation if we so choose, and to determine the form of government best suited to our own needs. Then it's up to us. So all we can do is deliver freedom from the prison that this lying Anglo-British state has put us in by pretending that we're a partner in the creation of a state that never came into existence. We can do that, but then it's got to be the people. It's going to come back home. And hopefully the people that mobilized in 2014 will see that there's real hope now, that this is not just a maybe referendum that Westminster can interfere with and break the power down, mess with the postal vote. This is something else. This is a different thing, and we have a chance, and it's going to be, it's worth having hope, and it's worth putting everything into it.
Do you know this, Sarah? I don't know in my lifetime have I been excited. And I know, honestly, just by looking at the facts and having a very detailed look at things and looking around me, looking at this parallel universe that's painted. And I say this to everybody, look out your front window. Is that the utopia, the nirvana you are enjoying right now? Or is it the one that's been fed to you through the TV and your goggle box? Wake up, get out of your house and do something about it, because that's the only way we can do this. Get involved. There's hubs all over the place. I'm involved with the one in the Highlands and Islands. I've been on a Zoom meeting with the guys there, taking things forward. We're happy at Caledon Radio to help and promote Salvo and everything you do. Other people should do as much as they can and get the facts, Sarah. It's got to be a learning process for everybody now.
Everybody can produce, every hub can produce leaflets, they can have events, and we're hoping the thing every hub can do, and every Salvo member can do, and every Liberation member can do, is go out and sign up at least a dozen other people to the Liberation, to Liberation Scotland. It's a simple thing to do. The QR code, we're constantly attacked. You just keep doing it to get in. And because if nothing else, the more we grow the numbers who have signed the Edinburgh Proclamation, the bigger our representation at the United Nations. So, there's the thing anybody can do. Standing at the bus stop, in the grocery, in your line to pay for your shopping, at your club, in the pub,
Hmm.
you know, meeting friends for a coffee, sign them up.
Yes.
It's a simple, you just read it, you
Yes.
support that, yes or no, yes, right, sign it. And by signing it, you're increasing the presence of Scotland in the United Nations, and of the, making it clear how many people in Scotland want to see us liberated, and be aware this is
Mm.
liberation. Liberation doesn't just mean independence.
No.
Independence for most countries around the world has meant that they ended up with a, they couldn't organize themselves according to their, because they've been so crushed according to their own, um,
Yeah.
political and constitutional, uh, history.
Hmm.
And so they ended up with a version of the colonial, the oppressive government. We don't want the English political system in Scotland. We want our own,
Yeah.
and we want the rights of the people back. We don't want to invent something from nothing and then end up with this horrible Western, or as my friend Nancy used to say, this white feudal culture.
Oh yeah, we
We
don't want that.
we want the common good. We want the
Hmm.
sovereignty of the people.
Hmm.
We want those civil rights, all modernized, of course, all updated, direct democracy, um, participatory forums and assemblies where the people are directly involved, and we want, so that we can start rebuilding community and community benefits and values.
Hmm.
So we want to begin restoring what we can of the best
That
of
there is.
Scotland, that comes from the past, right back to the Declaration of the Principle and up to the Claim of Right. The best of that, modernised, so that we offer a Scotland that is worth having, and that is much more than independence. And if you're in favour of that, get out there and get people. That's what we're looking to.
Hmm.
We've got, we've reached. All we've done is managed to get onto the first plank of the journey here, Norrie.
Yes.
It's all that
Yes.
work just to get onto that first step. That
Final
first step,
final
you know.
question, Sarah, because we're running out of time. How long do you think it'll take before the political parties cannot avoid what's happening with the people's movement?
It's odd, because the question is, when do you think that dam's going to burst?
Hmm.
When the dam bursts, um, they'll be swept along. They'll have no choice. But I suspect that it will look a bit like it has with every other liberation movement. At some
Hmm.
point,
Hmm.
that movement swept all the previous establishment away. If you look at what happened to Parnell's government,
Correct.
um,
Yep.
when
Hmm.
Sinn Féin swept through those elections.
Hmm.
Um, so it's, understand, and we're in a position where we can do this. Although many people have said there will be violence, they won't let us go without
Yeah.
military intervention. I
Yeah.
think it can be done peacefully. I really do. I think that the way that the tectonic plates are shifting internationally,
Mm.
um, it's really quite possible that Scotland will be able to claim its rights, get justice after all this time, and
Well,
begin to build, without there being the necessity of violence. I really believe that.
well, do you know what you've done, Sarah? It's almost like going back to 2014. We had a date to work towards, and now I think in all our minds we should take this as a target to go for. What have we got to lose? Nothing but the chains that bind us.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Sarah, listen, thanks so much for coming on. I always love having you on to listen to the history of Scotland and the way forward for Scotland. And to me, you're much more than a pensioner in Fife. You're a stalwart of Scotland. Good on you, gal. And listen,
Well, it's lovely to talk to you, and hopefully I'll get to see you soon.
you will indeed. We'll make a point on that. Look after yourself, Sarah, and take care.
And you. Bye now.
Bye now. Bye bye. Right, we've got some music.